In the last few months, I've been traveling in different parts of our continent. I've been in East Africa, West Africa, North Africa. And what has been interesting is that as I meet different people, in particular government officials, and you exchange business cards with people, I realize that people give me email addresses, of big global institutions, and not email addresses of either their own respective institutions, or for instance, if you work for government in South Africa, you would have an address that would be so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so at whatever organization.gov.za. And if you are in another country, a similar address would come in. But I've realized that people don't use these addresses. And I thought as to what could be the reason that people do not use .gov, platforms in their respective countries, or they do not use, for instance, addresses of their respective departments and their own organizations. I realize the fact that, this is something that requires address, and it does require attention. Now, let me go into a bit of detail in this. Now, we all have, organizations have websites. Whether that company would be under .co.za, convergencepartners.co.za, or convergencepartners.com, or for instance, an organization would be, parliament.gov.za, or an organization would be, an academic institution under .ac, or an organization would be .org, maybe it's a not-for-profit organization. Now, then email addresses then flow out of that, and people will then build email addresses that link them with their websites. So you would then have Andile at convergencepartners.co.za, for instance, or you would have somebody's name at a government department.gov.country or .za in the case of South Africa. Now, if we want citizens to use what is called e-government or e-commerce, those people who, for instance, if I have an email address that is Convergence, that means that I represent Convergence. I wouldn't give people an email account that is not Convergence, for instance. Because I trust Convergence. I trust Convergence email address. I trust the fact that that email address, I will get it on time, and that the platform we've built under our own website and our own email address system, that is what I use to communicate. Now, I ask people, why would you use another email address of another generic organization when you have an organization that you work for instance? And this issue bothered me a little bit, and I felt that I see a lot of these things whereby a government official would give me for instance, a Yahoo or Gmail address or any of those addresses, and ask myself, why are they not using the address of the department of the government where they work? Because that's what you would trust first, for instance, because this is an organization you work for. This is an organization that you should have an address for. I then try to do a bit of research to understand this. I think it's a topic that we need to look at, in my view, engage authorities, in particular around .gov, for instance, that why officials of government are not using either email addresses that come out of their respective organizations. I mean, I think we all need to understand the agreements that we sign when we sign up to these global mail platforms. There's nothing wrong about them. I'm not saying anything that there's anything wrong about them. But if you represent an organization and you know, you give somebody a business card and you want people to communicate to you, I mean, to your organization through you, it is, I think, very important that the address that you give should be related to the organization you represent. Now, there's a lot then at the back end that needs to be built. For instance, in order for your email address coming out of the organization you represent to be reliable, you know, and it's very important. So if you want to sell electronic government services to citizens, you say to citizens, you want to, as a government, you want to provide, you know, e-government services. You need to do that, and firstly by ensuring that the staff of government is able to use, you know, government's email addresses, is able to use government platforms. I mean, so a simple thing like an email, you know, if you work for a certain organization, you need to use that email address of that organization, you know, if you want people to communicate with you, if you are the face of that organization. Now, almost all countries have the platform of .gov.country. I mean, like .gov.za, .gov.ng, .gov. You know, whatever, all the 55 countries in the continent. This is a platform I think is hugely underutilized by different governments, basically. I mean, we need to find ways how, for instance, governments, services, or government employees, I mean, government leaders are able to use this platform for purposes of communicating with other people. I think it is something that, you know, we need to build confidence in them so that they use the platform. This is how we can build confidence in citizenry to be able to communicate with government via e-government platforms, because the people who work for government are using, for instance, you know, such services. To a less extent in South Africa, I mean, most government officials, I've seen them, they use, I mean, .gov.za platform. And I've traveled in different parts of the world where people give me a totally different address and not the .gov, I mean, of their respective countries. So we really would like to, I mean, find a way of engaging different governments to see how best we can assist in ensuring that this platform of .gov can be used effectively in addressing, for instance, electronic government in the future, or even building confidence that the people who work for government themselves must be able to use the email address. Right? I mean, I personally believe that you get more privacy in the email address of the organization that you work for. And that as long as you read and understand the privacy rules, as long as you understand the rules of running an email address with the organization that you work for. I mean, you also need, if you are going to subscribe to an email address of an organization that sits in a country far from you, you need to understand the agreement that you sign, for instance, with that organization, you know, in terms of privacy of your email as it's stored in servers in jurisdictions where you have absolutely no control or understanding of the laws of that particular country. So I think this topic is something that also we need to, you know, continue to engage in. I strongly believe that as Africans, we need to use email addresses of organizations in the African continent. That is how we can be able to build African traffic, you know, because if we communicate within the African continent, you know, in order for us to avoid our traffic going outside the continent, simply hosting email platforms in the continent is going to be critical. So we need to find email addresses in African organizations if we want our traffic to almost be kept within the African continent. Otherwise, we will have the same problem that we were talking about, to say the way in which our infrastructure and networks were built during the colonial era were built to almost facilitate communications between the colonial country and the country that was colonized. How can we perpetuate this? By us having email addresses, for instance, of countries where we have absolutely no control of the laws. We cannot even go back, and ask certain things to be done by authorities in those countries whenever there's a problem. So I really feel that if we have built all this undersea fiber, if we've built all this infrastructure of fiber, of mobile infrastructure, it's as important as that infrastructure that, email servers, data centers, cloud platforms that we have must again be located within the continent. Similarly, the way in which us as users use this infrastructure, we must use the infrastructure in the countries and the continents where we are. I mean, this is how we can enhance the infrastructure that we have built, but also to ensure that, we show confidence in the infrastructure that we have. Basically, that to me is what I would say. But of course, this is not something that can be changed overnight. People need to understand what is the difference between you registering an email address where the server sits, 20,000 kilometers away, and where you get an email address where the server is, 5 kilometers away from you. Because if you look at your entire communications pattern, you communicate with friends and relatives and colleagues. And most of these people are much closer to the jurisdiction where you are. They are not 20,000 kilometers away. So it is very important that, we need to understand how we can build this infrastructure for people to have confidence in the infrastructure of their own continent, of their own countries, of their own cities. Thank you.